Thank you.
Okay, so the discussion of implementation guidelines, to let you know that I did bring the implementation guidelines as what I sent to the committee, to the city council at their last council meeting. The city council approved the guidelines as they were written. So those changes are in effect. We also had suggestions from Beth along different, with different ideas for the guidelines going forward and revisions. So we attached that to the agenda. So that way the committee, if they would like to, could discuss them at this point in time, or if there's other changes to the guidelines that you would like to discuss at this point in time, we can do that. And I would suggest that maybe I don't bring it back in the July meeting, because the July meeting is very full. But if you would like to, we could work through changes to the guidelines. I can bring them back at a later date, like in September or October, I would think it would be good. Does anybody want to kick off any conversation about this, or do we want to put this on pause until a later date?
I think we should take a look at them, the questions that I asked, and then I have a couple more that I'd like to also add. I'm just sort of looking for that email or that message. Does everyone have it?
Well, I don't have it. Does anyone? Is that?
It was at the. I just also learned that it was at the end of the minutes at the agenda report. So I'm just.
Oh, I have it. Should I read it?
I probably have it in my notes. Let me look.
The agenda packet.
I could read them out loud if you would like. So the first one is, can funds that are deposited into the general public art fund that were not earmarked for specific permanent public art possibly be considered for performing temporary art, local art shows, or community arts educational programming? Do you want me to read all three? Or do we want to talk about them one at a time?
I think we should just go one at a time.
Okay.
Do one at a time.
So just to give you a little bit of history about this item, that conversation was discussed by the committee that worked on the public art implementation guidelines. And the committee made the recommendation to the city council that those would not be part of it, because the idea for the public art from that committee who made the recommendation on the initial guidelines was that this would be for permanent pieces of art that would be able to be in Brisbane. So, you know, obviously these guidelines are able to be changed by, by the city council with recommendations from the art committee. So if you would want to change that aspect of this, of the guidelines, that would be fine. The question I think that you would want to talk about is, would you limit the amount of money that went towards these types of programs versus more of the permanent types of art pieces in town, if you would like to do that? And Angel brought up, so people, if you can see it, Angel brought it up, but I'll still read them because I know we have a couple of people who are on the phone.
Well, I just like to add to that, my question around that. I was aware of that. I actually had looked at the implementation guidelines when they originally came out, and that was always one of my concerns. And I think that one of the reasons that this was sort of decided to be just sort of permanent art was because the people that were working at the time did not want it to appear like it was a conflict of interest. But I still think that there's going to be a lot of money there. I also think that art is a living thing, and it is what brings the community together. And we could discuss if these kinds of arts projects, events, and educational programming are covered in other ways than this. But if they're not, it would seem to me a nice way to earmark some of these funds. We could decide on a percentage or whatever. But I think that this is also really a key part of public involvement, and also doing artistic literacy teaching and education so that people can really understand the art by being able to be involved in temporary and educational and also performative experiences.
So I have the art guidelines up on my computer. So what it says is no less than 65% of the money fees collected shall be directed for public art acquisition and may be spent for the following purposes: artist services and fees, acquisition of art, artist selection process, including jury selection and model or design fees. No more than 15% of the money collected may be directed for maintenance and curatorial services, identifying plaques or repair, maintenance surveys, curatorial services, and other conservation work necessary to keep all artworks in the city collection in standard condition. And then remaining, no more than 20% of the fee may be directed for public art administration and may be spent for the following purposes: project administration, community education programs, publicity, dedications, and other purposes as recommended by the Public Art Committee and approved by the City Council. So I think the idea of, you might be able to say that the arts educational programming would be one of those items that would be covered by that within that last 20%. The question would be as to what the definition of acquisition of art would mean, whether temporary art would fall under acquisition of art. I think the committee, when they developed the guidelines, looked at that as permanent art, but you can make a recommendation that, broaden that definition if you would like, to make it temporary art or other types of art other than just a piece of art that the city owns. So what you might want to do is, if you want to broaden it, is broaden the definition of what acquisition of art means.
We talked so much about this. It's interesting because we have talked about like having temporary art installments as a committee previously, and it never came up that might not be possible.
Yes, some of the things, just as an example, some of the things we talked about were, getting artists who have huge pieces of art that they're storing somewhere or placing somewhere, that maybe, we could have rotational art on linear parks or in special places. So it could always be, there's always some fabulous piece of art in place X, and then it's there for 6 months and goes somewhere else. And I mean, there's a lot of ideas, and that one question, Beth, is, that's probably worthy of several meetings worth of discussion. I think we'd need to drill down into, what does that mean, and bring it back and look at it further. But from my perspective, because it's like, wow, there's a lot of things in that one question. It's not really one question. It's like 10 questions right there to me.
I had a question on the third item, the 20% clarification, 20% art administration. With that, we were talking about having possibly a consultant for the Baylands. Does that consultant fee fall into the 20%, or is that something, or is that somewhere else, that fee?
It could fall within that fee as part of project administration. The other one, depending on how it's defined, it could fall within the 15% for curatorial services, depending on what that would, the definition that the committee would make. But I think it would fall within one or the other of those two that we could figure, as a committee, we could decide, how we would want to define that, or how you would want to define that, since I'm not really a voting member of your committee. So do we want to put the idea of defining acquisition of art on a future agenda, as Karen suggested, or do we want to spend more time talking about that today?
Maybe on a future agenda. I just know that we should discuss it more, because we just brought forward a bunch of suggestions to the city council. So to bring forward, I think we should probably discuss it a little bit more.
Okay.
We just agendized this on the city council meeting.
Yes, as I said, I know we would not get to it on July 15th, so my suggestion would be waiting till at least September or October before we brought it back again. Okay, so number 2.
Well, sorry, Stuart, before we move on, that would give everybody, you know, time to sort of percolate that one too, I think would be a really good idea.
Yes.
And I think we should get a legal opinion, like, does Tom interpret acquisition? Like, Tom may interpret acquisition as like could apply to temporary art, and that might not even be something that, you know, it's all in how you interpret. We have plenty of ordinances that we interpret certain ways. So I think it would be good to have a legal opinion on that, because that might take care of like some of the discussion. Because Tom could come back and say, yeah, you could interpret that to say that it, you know, temporary art is included, and then we don't have to spend a whole meeting discussing whether we want to
temporary
change
art. But we would still want to talk about local art shows or community arts or local art shows or other items like that. Okay. I will talk to Tom and I will get a better definition. And I think what we could do is put the definition within the implementation guidelines, so that way it's more clear to everybody who reads it in some fashion. Okay. Number 2, do we want to have anything written in these guidelines that will ensure that whatever endeavors we take on with artists, architects, landscapers, and other service providers follow the equal opportunity laws, and that we are a commission that make a concerted effort at outreach? So for that one, I will just say that as a city, we have to follow all equal opportunity laws. So that would be, there's not a general reason to put something into the guidelines themselves, because we will follow those no matter what. But if you would like to make sure that that is well understood within the art community, we can do that. And I know when we do an RFP, we would put that in any RFP that we would do, because that's what we do as a city. But if you would like to, as a committee, have that someplace more explicit within the guidelines, we can do that as well. Okay.
Well, obviously, since I wrote the question, I do think so, because I know that unless we specifically state it and put it out front and center, it's easy for that to, there's a way that when you're trying to think about outreach, that when, you know, unless you really make a concerted effort by outreaching into particular places, that will really give us access to more artists of color, it just simply doesn't happen. So I think it's really important to show as an intention, and also as part of we fly the Black Lives Matter flag, for example, and I feel like we need to be constantly stepping up to the intention and the challenge that proposes for us.
I don't have a comment one way or the other on this, but I think, you know, everybody needs to pipe in and let everyone know how they feel.
Right. I mean, if you would like, I could, you know, that would be I can add that type of language to the implementation guidelines if nobody has any issues with that. I will say that when we done the last 2 RFPs, we had a wide variety of people applying, of different appearingly different races, different sexual orientations, and everything that you would hope for within an EOC type of request. But I agree with you, Beth, that, you know, it may be, you know, we may want to be more specific as we do this. So if the committee doesn't have, you know, this is something that we do as a city normally, and so if this committee doesn't have any real concerns about it, we will find the language that we would put in normally, and we can add that to the implementation guidelines.
Does that need to be does that need to come to a city council meeting?
I think what we would do is whenever the committee comes up with the next round of implementation guidelines, we would make sure we would have that be part of this. But I think in the meantime, before that, those implementation guidelines are approved by the city council, the committee, you know, could abide by that idea. And as we're going forward with different projects, to have that at the, you know, within the forefront of our minds, or your minds, or the RFP's minds, or whatever, as we're doing this, so that way we're not losing that aspect of it as we go forward. the third item was, do we have any protocol to deal with potential situations where a developer and the public art committee cannot come to an agreement on an acceptable piece of public art? Let me look at the guidelines to see what we do have.
I think you left out a critical piece of that, which is come to an agreement on an acceptable
on their private property. Yes, I'm sorry, I did.
Yeah.
So the implementation guidelines say the city council will have the final approval for any public art project. If the council does not approve the proposed project, it can either refer it back to the advisory committee for reconsideration. I think what it would happen is if there's a disagreement, it would go to the city council, and the city council would have, for any piece of public art, the idea is that the city council would have that final say. And then if they don't agree, if they don't like the piece of public art, it would go back for reconsideration. So I think the idea at this point in time is that it would go for city council approval still, even if it was on somebody's private property.
Okay, I guess the reason I put that in there is that I think that it would be good to have a really have the wording very tight so that we don't get a situation where you know, a corporation wants to put they're gonna, like, let's just say go to the extreme, like a 3D logo in their public-private property and call it public art, and then what? So like, I know the city council can say, no, we reject it, but then what? You know, like kind of a, and then what, just to sort of have some language that will really protect us from that kind of thing happening, because we all know that corporations and their lawyers are really good at finding loopholes.
I can work with Tom to see if we can come up with other language that might meet what your criteria is.
Okay. Great.
I'm not concerned about that, Beth. I think there's so many checks and balances along the way that they can't just design a piece of art and stick it there and say, here you got it. I feel confident that we're sort of fairly well taken care of, but it's no harm in asking Tom. Sure.
We did have a situation where we did have a company design a piece that was like reflected their business, but not in a way that like the average person could necessarily make the connection. And we did have the opportunity to give feedback as the commission to the artist and the business. So it was fairly collaborative. And then ultimately what happened was that something happened with like their funding, and they couldn't like justify having a line item on their in their accounting that said that like 100,000 or 200,000 towards public art. They felt like that would have been questioned by their investors. So they ended up just giving, or like that they bought a piece of art for that amount. So they ended up just paying the city their fee, and so that they could list it as like city fees or, you know, developer fees or whatever. So that's kind of how it worked out with this situation so far.
Can I jump in here for just a sec? How do we bring up like, because I'm kind of new to this whole committee system and I don't really understand how things are brought forward. So if I'm doing this wrong, correct me. But I feel just as a new member of this group that I'm terribly ignorant of the way this this fund comes about and what this fund is. And I would really like some transparency or some reporting of what is in the fund, maybe a quarterly report or something, so we can look at the numbers, because the numbers really help me understand the scope of this fund and what we're looking at. Like, are we looking at a, you know, $100 piece of art? Are we looking at, is a $100 piece of art normal, or is a $100,000 piece of art normal? I kind of need to know the scope just for my own decision abilities, because sometimes I think $10,000 sounds huge, but then maybe if I look at the whole picture, it's not that huge. So I would just like some kind of financial accounting to be quarterly given of this fund to this committee. Does that sound reasonable?
Sure. I mean, I could give you, I'm looking up right now what we have in the fund, if I can find, fortunately I've got two screens open. So my other screen has our accounts.
Do you want me to allow you to share screen?
No, I'll just read it out.
But
I can give you an accounting of what we have at the next meeting.
That would be great. And I would also like to know some kind of spreadsheet on, is it being spent now? Is any of it earmarked? Is any interest being made on this money that's sitting in this account? And just kind of a spreadsheet of what the money is doing, because I have absolutely no idea. And
it's
that's
just sitting in the account, and it is earning interest.
Okay, well, I just kind of like to,
yeah.
So it's a pretty good comprehensive accounting quarterly of that money would, I think, help us make decisions. And I would not feel so ignorant of the decisions I'm making, because if I have no idea what's in the account, then I have no idea what the scale is of the decisions that we're making. And so that's my comment.
Correct. So we currently have $1,112,434.86 in the account. We have allocated $25,000 of that to restore the Midtown mural, and we have another $25,000 outstanding for the project at the library, I believe.
Okay, and see, I don't know, I didn't know that. I just, because I'm coming late to this party, I would just like to see that in writing, just before we have these meetings, just so I know, oh, here we are, and this I can expect this money to be spent here, and the balance to be whatever. So I just wondered if we could get that started. Does anyone else have any comments about that?
Yeah, Lisa, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was one of the biggest complaints that I heard from people who were calling me, that they wanted to see transparency of what was in the fund and how it was being used. So I agree that we need to see it, but I also think we need to find some other way to make it transparent to the public, because I couldn't say, oh, well, all you have to do is go on the city website and it's all there. You know, it should be, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So in the guidelines, it says that you would meet on an annual basis. We'll meet to review the balance of the fund and the public art fund to determine if they should propose any projects to be initiated and commissioned by the city. So we would do it normally on an annual basis, which would probably be your meeting in January, but we could do it on a quarterly basis instead as well.
Well, if we're meeting all the time and having discussions, I don't think, maybe quarterly is too much, but I definitely need it, you know, more than once a year, because these are ongoing projects. And I think the decisions are going to be based on, you know, the balance of that fund and the big picture. I mean, wow, we don't know what, you know, over the years, what money is going to come into this fund, you know, and if a big drop of money is coming into the fund, and we're going to be looking at making decisions, it would be nice to know ahead of time, oh, that's dropped, you know? So anyways, does anyone else think quarterly is too much, too little? What do you think? Quarterly is fine? Okay, so let's do quarterly.
Quarterly.
First question was like, how does money come into the fund? And then you moved into like quarterly statements. So should Stuart go over how funds come in, or do you have an understanding.
Well, that was just an example of money coming in and out of the fund and would be reflected on those reports.
So you know how the money is, like, you know how the money is derived though.
Yeah, it's through developers fees, right? Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Do we need to have a?
Annette, are you raising your hand?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I have another idea also. It's a little bit different, but since we're talking about the guidelines, one of the things I was thinking about is maybe we establish, when we are considering an artist, the process of the actual selection. Maybe when we take a vote, the artist needs to get like a majority vote, because I think that was kind of part of the problem with the last process, when we went through the selection process of the artist, and it was narrowed down to 3. And the one that we ultimately selected was, it was a split, and it became the second runner up that was ultimately selected. And so I just kind of feel like that was not really a good thing. Like, I think that was already a sign right there. It only got 1 vote. And so one committee member really wanted it, but it was everyone's second vote. So it's just kind of something that I've thought about a lot. And I don't know if we want to revisit that as well, since we're talking about the guidelines.
I mean, I will just say that the challenge to that is, if you have 3 artists and you split the votes equally between all 3 of them, you will never have somebody you may never have somebody on the first go around get a majority of the votes, if that makes sense.
So I don't know, maybe you dwindle it from 3 to 2 or something. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out when the artist that was ultimately selected was really,
No, I understand the concern. I just wanted to, I don't know if you want to have it as part of a guideline as a very strict, like, we will follow this method, or if each of the, at some point in the conversation, the idea is that we're not coming to a real agreement on this. We need to find a different solution.
I mean, I don't, maybe it's something that we just, I mean, I don't know if it needs to be in the guidelines, or it's something that's discussed. A guideline is discussed every time we go through the process. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't really want to be locked into something as well. But anyways, it's just a conversation that I wanted to have about, and maybe some feedback on that.
Do we want?
We would have.
Sorry. Go ahead, Madison. I apologize for cutting you off.
She's frozen, I think.
She froze. I did not do that. I did not freeze her.
Do it. Madison, I think you're going to have to go out and come back in. You're frozen. That's the quietest I've ever seen her.
I hate it when that happens.
You don't get to laugh as her mother, Danette.
Yes, she does.
Oh, stop.
Gotta make jokes sometimes. Come on. Let me text her.
Yeah, she probably doesn't even know she's frozen. She's probably still talking to us. Wait, I think she does. I think she left. She now got the idea that she's out.
Come on, everybody. You gotta laugh at things all the time, right? Especially her mom. So since we're waiting for Madison to come back in, does anybody else use Logi? I think it's Logitech, the camera. Does anyone else use that? Mine, it's a wonderful thing, but occasionally we won't do anything and it'll just turn me sideways, and I'm trying to technically figure that one out. And I'm not.
That's so cool.
It doesn't mute me, but it just turns me sideways. So I was just wondering if anyone's had an experience with this camera. It's so weird.
I wonder if because it's kind of a horizontal format, like everybody here is kind of a horizontal and you're a vertical.
Oh, interesting.
Do you see that?
Yeah.
Maybe it's because it's a horizontal format. Your camera wants to make you a horizontal.
Huh. Okay. Thanks. I'll give that one to Emmett to look at, because I was in a pretty important meeting and I went totally sideways, and it's hard to take somebody seriously when they're sideways. Here she comes.
We missed all of what you had told us, Madison. We apologize.
Froze, and I was like, what's going on? And then I just lost Wi-Fi. So what I was saying was just like, I think that the writing was kind of on the wall in the beginning, and we didn't really, because it was mostly our first time as a formed committee going through this, we probably should have kind of reevaluated at that point when we were so split. But trudging forward and trying to make like our second choice work, I think made it so that none of us really loved the outcome. So maybe that's just something like a policy that we just apply as a group, and just say like, hey, if we find ourselves in this position, maybe we'll reconvene with one another and determine whether we should, put another RFP out there, go back to the drawing board. I would just hate to see us spend, $10,000 again or more if it's a bigger project, and have something ultimately none of us really love, but we feel like we're so deep in the process, like we just have to keep moving forward. And so I'm good with whatever the committee, thinks is best, whether we want to suggest this. I kind of, so whether you want to suggest this as like a full-blown part of the implementation guidelines, or if we want to just do it on a case-by-case basis.
Well, I feel really bad that we wasted that money too. I mean, it was a flawed situation, and I would hate to repeat that as well for any reason. So if there's anything we can put in place as a committee that would put the brakes on repeating a mistake, I mean, it's stupidity to do the same thing again, expecting a different outcome, right? So if there's something that we can do to ensure we don't do that, I'm sort of with what Danette said. Let's think about that long and hard. What do we do? Is it asking for another RFP, or is there something else? Because if we end up, all of us saying, again, this is only our second choice artist, we could end up in the same spot again. And you know what? We only wasted $10,000. Imagine if this had been a $100,000 project and we put 50% down, that's $50,000, we'd be talking about throwing away at the will of other people. I am not okay with that. So what do you newbies think about this,
Well, I was surprised, but at the same time, I feel like that experience has really informed future decisions. I think that's really fresh in our minds, and I don't think we'll repeat that mistake again, at least not in this instance. However, we will not always be the same people on this committee, and new people will come in and maybe repeat the same mistake, and that's when you don't want it to happen. So yes, having something written or some kind of guideline backing the system up, if it's not more of a universal choice. But even if it is a universal choice, from what I understand, the city council has the ability to walk it back anyways. Is that true? I mean, even if we make a decision in this committee, the city council has the last say, and they can veto it too, and then money's wasted again. I mean, I don't know how you can lock down this decision making process where you'll never lose deposit money, except maybe you limit the deposit money.
I wonder, because that's a really good point too, Lisa. I wonder, Stuart, is there any way that, like, none of us were really excited about this piece of art? None of us. And I'm wondering if there is some way legally that if we, you know, go through the first part of working on a design with an artist, that we have these incremental things go to city council. So, you know, if, you know, we thought we had an idea that we all loved and then took it to city council and, you know, stage one, the city council said, that sucks, we hate it, then we're in a much better place as a committee to go, okay, let's stop here. I don't know how that could work, or.
You are a committee of the city council, so you're able to go to the city council anytime, you know, you would like to with a recommendation or with an update. Okay. You know, we could always put it on to the council agenda as a workshop or a presentation for feedback.
Okay.
That's good.
And that would just be, you know, something that the committee could be aware of and say, you know, we would like to, you know, we're at this point in time, we would like the city council, we would like to make the city council aware of it. Or, as you know, you do at the end of the meetings, you provide feedback. You do provide the city council with an update of the different committees that you have been part of. So what you could ask is for Angel or I to give you a little bit more information, or to give you a picture of where we're at. So when you're doing your update, we can put that picture up on the screen at that point in time to, you know, say, you know, we've met with the artist 3 times, this is where we're at. And, or, you know, is there any, you know, are there any thoughts on where we're at? Because we're, you know, we're going to go back at another meeting and we're going to continue to work on this piece of art. Are there things that as a council you would like to see us work on? I mean, you could do that as well. So I think there's opportunities to do that. I think it's like a committee, I think it would be at a committee request as to when to ask for that. Because I think the challenge would be is as you're working with an artist, there may be things that you as a committee are not quite comfortable with that you're still working to change. And that, you know, and getting council feedback at that point may not be exactly what you want. So I would imagine you'd want to stay as flexible on that idea as possible.
Sure. As long as we move in a slightly different direction, I think it would probably make everybody on this committee feel more comfortable.
Right. I mean, I think on something like this, the more flexibility that you give yourselves, because the different circumstances will give you different answers.
Sure.
And you don't want to have the same answer for 3 or 4, you know, for 4 or 5 different problems. Because what you might find is that you may not all like the number 1 artist, but you're all very happy with the number 2. And you wouldn't want to say that, you know, unless I get a majority on our, you know, unless we get a majority on our first vote, or that, you know, at least, or even if the, you know, what you may find is that the 2 who the committee likes isn't, you know, you get into the same, let's say you get into the same situation where you get a, you know, a split vote between the first 2, but the 3rd one may be very exciting for a different reason entirely. And I would just say that, you know, I would keep what happened in mind. I would suggest that, you know, as we go through the process, you know, we'll take notes and we'll, you know, staff will stay somewhat consistent through the process over years. When I leave, Angel will still be here. When Angel leaves, whoever was, you know, the number 2 person at that point in time would still be here. I mean, so, you know, we have that ability to work with the committee over time to say, here's what happened in the past. Here's the kinds of things that we did to fix it. And you're not going to lose every committee member all at once as well. But I understand the concern. And I think, you know, something that we will be more mindful of going forward. Beth, I see your hand up.
Yeah. So I guess I'd like to just step back 1 step further beyond that too. And that is that I feel that as our people that are participating on this committee, that we need to find a way to really educate ourselves about public art, about land art, earthwork art, it's like a whole world that, and I know all of you have other jobs and everything else, but this is a world that I live in. And So I feel like if we're going to start taking on really big projects, we're going to be playing out in a world that we need to really know about. And so I wanted to also think about how we might put something in the guidelines as a way that we may educate ourselves. Like, for example, you know, like household names in my world are like Robert Smithson and Chris Drury and Beverly Pepper and Agnes Dennis and Alan Sonfis and Betsy Damon and Richard Long and Nancy Holden. If these names are not familiar to you, we need to get educated, okay? Because these are the kind of artists that we're gonna be eventually, hopefully, with the amount of money that we're gonna get, being able to hire and play on that level. So I'm constantly going to conferences now. They're all online, which makes it easier for everyone. They do cost money. There's a big one, for example, happening, the Nevada Museum of Art, which is the state that has the most land art and earthwork art in the country. That they are hosting a 2-month ongoing seminar on land and earthwork art. And you know, a lot of it too, there's so many kinds of issues that we have to think about, that it's not just like making something pretty that's iconic, but it's also how are we dealing with the land environmentally, and how are we dealing with the origins of the land, and who does it belong to, and there's how does it relate to the surrounding community, and how do we educate and create programming for the community. So it's a very multifaceted field. It's super interesting. This is my world. This is my passion. And this is the reason why I got on this commission. But I feel that if we're going to be making these kinds of decisions, we need to educate ourselves. And given that we're a small town, you know, we didn't have maybe as many people that were like, you know, if we were in New York or Oakland even, there'd be a lot of people that would maybe be on the commission that this is part of their world. So we have really dedicated people that are here, but we need to really make a commitment somehow to educating ourselves. So I wanted to see if there's a way to potentially maybe put some intention, some funds. I mean, like that earthwork conference is $150. It's not a big deal, but it's maybe not something, maybe we could join as a commission or something like that. And so that to really make this information available for everyone, because it's gonna get big, guys, which is really exciting. It's super exciting. This is why I got on this commission. We have the opportunity to really do some iconic land and earthwork and put Brisbane on the map as an art center. So I'm really excited by that. And I hope that we can find a way to really step up to the plate for that.
I mean, I see Lisa's hand up, so
okay.
Lisa?
Well, yeah, I'd like to, you know, I really appreciate Beth being on the committee, because I think she brings that world and that knowledge, which is really valuable. And any information she could throw our way to better educate us is great. But I also remember us having a conversation about a consultant, about an art consultant who could bring to us some, just open our eyes to some stuff that you know, your average non-artist could look at and consider. I think that was part of our agenda, wasn't it, to have a consultant? And yeah. I think educating ourselves through someone who's really educated, who could hold up stuff for us to consider, I think would be really valuable in that way. Because I know going to conferences is great. I don't really have the time to do it. So I would really appreciate some curated visions put in front of us. That's all.
I think that, like, to echo what you were saying, Lisa, we did have that discussion, and I think that it's the intention to have, you know, a solid, like essentially a staff member, right, to help us navigate through the Baylands. The Baylands will generate millions of dollars for public art, and I don't expect that this committee can go about, you know, spending that money without somebody who is a dedicated person to help us navigate that. And it's important to have, you know, somebody who is in that field, who does have relationships with artists who has worked on, you know, large installations, who can help us maybe determine whether there should be like a cohesive theme or where it's best to go. I think, you know, we have to be aware, as Beth said, about like what are our strengths and weaknesses. And you know, I always love to learn about public art, and when I'm out, I'm constantly taking photos of art that I see that speaks to me to get inspiration. But I think at this point, no amount of research that I'm going to do here and there is really going to make me that expert, right? That's not something that that's not the field that I'm in. So to bring somebody on board to supplement that will ensure, I think, that we, you know, get it right. But I think it's always great to have, you know, to have more education. Maybe we could invite people to speak at our, you know, speak at our meetings. And I think that there's something in there maybe for education, right? So we maybe could pay some people to come and make presentations, and we could invite the community. I think that's, we're always trying to find ways to bring the community into this. And that's like one thing that you talked about, Beth, is like, how can we be more transparent? Maybe this could be something that we can invite the community to partake in. Also, I know that each subcommittee has a certain amount of threshold of money that they're allowed to spend without council approval. I think it's $1,000 annually. I'm not sure if it's annually or at one time, but if it's like $150 to attend, we could probably all go to a conference like that with just being able to spend that money within our committee. So all good points, but I don't anticipate we're going to navigate through the Baylands without, you know, having somebody there who really knows what they're doing.
And I would see that as more as the next item on our agenda, which would be the work plan for the upcoming fiscal year, as opposed to specifically in the implementation guidelines.
One other thought about that, if I may, before we move on to the next step. Is that okay?
It would probably be better if you want to talk about hiring somebody. That would be part of the work plan, I would think, as opposed to implementation guidelines. And we still have people from the public who may want to talk about the implementation guidelines themselves. So I just want to make sure that, you know, that we stay within that agenda item first.
Okay. Well, you tell me, can I just bring it up? Because I don't want it to move on to the next agenda item. Maybe it is. But so what I just wanted to say is that on other arts commissions, I have friends who participate as consulting artists, and they're paid for each different specific project. So that we also want to create a situation where we're not only beholden to one art consultant. And so by bringing in different artists, and in particular outreaching to different artists of color and whatnot, and having them be paid consultants on each major project, I think would also give us some of the mixed expertise that we may be looking for.
Okay. Is there anything else on the implementation guidelines before we open it up to the public? Does anybody from the public wish to speak?
I have not received any emails yet or text. If you'd like to speak, hit. Oh, great. Thank you, Kevin. Go ahead.
If I may, about the implementation guidelines. First of all, I'm glad to hear a lot of the discussion about how to improve the implementation guidelines. They were always intended as something that we would change as we went along, and as we grew in experience, that we would apply that experience to the implementation guidelines. So I think that's a very good thing. I don't think necessarily that the $10,000 that went as a kill fee to the artist is wasted if indeed we learn from our first time out, which I think everybody has pretty much said we stumbled a bit. But I do really want to ask, a couple of people have said, well, Kevin, why did you change your vote? Of course, nobody really asked me, but that was set out there. And one of the reasons that I decided to change my vote in the Parks and Rec Commission was because I understood that the implementation guidelines would send our red flag, if you want to call it, to the city council, and the city council would consider it. And I thought that was the logical conclusion of the implementation guidelines we were working with. I remember specifically, Stuart, asking you for the clarification of the whole Parks and Rec Commission. What happens if we reject this? And you said it goes to the City Council. City Council, it was already on their agenda for the next day or the next week, and it got pulled. And so the first stress test of the implementation guidelines that we had written failed, not because of, well, actually not because of the Public Arts Committee. We got into a group think and passed along something that was not particularly exciting, and not because of the Parks and Rec Commission, which did correctly identify it as such, but that there was this disconnect, this aborting of the process when it was pulled from the city council's agenda. And Parks and Rec, we asked subsequent to that, so what happened? And it was going to be on our next agenda, and it wasn't. And I asked privately, what happened? And never got an answer. And I think it's important to when we look at what did and didn't work, I think it's important to understand why that was pulled. So I'm asking now, why was that pulled? Who and why what was the thinking of pulling that from the City Council agenda, where the City Council could have said, yeah, never mind, we've gone this far, let's just do it and move on. That would have been a legitimate argument. Or, no, let's not do it, or let's send it back, or whatever. Ultimately, it's the City Council that makes these decisions. So I'm asking, what happened? Why did it get disconnected? Why was the first stress test of our implementation guidelines not brought to its conclusion?
I think at that time it was determined that there was other things on the agenda that were going to take an amount of time, that this item was not going to be able to have the full conversation that it needed based on the difference of opinion.
Difference of opinion amongst whom?
Between the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Public Art Selection Committee.
So then it would have come up to the City Council in the next meeting or the following meeting. It got postponed. That's a legitimate excuse. But why did the City Council all City Council members never have a look at it and learn from the process what can be learned? Because clearly there's a lot to be learned from our first attempt that, didn't hit the mark.
I think, as I said, it was just something that at that time, dealing with COVID and everything else that the City Council was dealing with, that this was not an item that would have been easily dealt with in a council, or been able to be dealt with in a council meeting, as we were going through a lot of other issues that the City Council was dealing with.
So then you would agree, Stuart, that the failure of the system was in this juncture between passing it along to City Council and City Council not taking it up.
I think this art committee has made a recommendation to the City Council as to what the process is going forward, and the City Council has agreed to it.
I see. Okay, well, thank you for that answer.
Okay.
Are there any other comments? I still have not received any additional emails or text on this topic. Okay, go ahead and move on.
So the next item on the agenda is the work plan. It is 4:30. This meeting is originally scheduled for an hour. I don't know if everybody would want to stay longer, or if we want to schedule another meeting to specifically talk about the work plan next time.
I do have a hard stop at 4:45.
That's 7 minutes according to Mike. That's 7 minutes according to Microsoft.
Yeah.
So do we want to schedule the next meeting and take up the work plan at the next meeting? And part of the work plan conversation was going to be about how to hire somebody to assist with the committee. Lisa, I see you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to postpone it if possible. And could we have a separate agenda set out for what will be discussed so we can be a little prepared?
Oh, I think the reason we did the work plan was really to allow the committee to have as much flexibility in the conversation. If you lay something out specifically, then you can't talk about anything that's not on that list.
Ah, okay. All right, didn't know that. Yeah, but I'd still like to postpone it because I think it will take more than 7 minutes to discuss.
You know, okay. It's going to give everybody time after this conversation, more time to gel a whole bunch of things, I think. Yeah.
And we're down to 6 minutes now. So
before we wrap up, I think this goes without saying, but I just want to say it and state it for the record since it's being recorded. I've never found any of you unable to speak your mind at any point in time, but I just want to reiterate that you are all allowed to disagree with me. You're allowed to disagree with Karen. Just because we're council members doesn't mean that our opinion is more important than yours. So know that y'all are new, and I want you guys to understand, in case it wasn't clear, that we all have equal authority, and I encourage you to disagree with me. I think that's the only way that, you know, we come up with decisions that are balanced and fair. And I don't have all the answers to everything. And, you know, oftentimes when someone disagrees with me, I realize, oh, wow, you know, that's such a good point. So please feel free to state your opinion on anything at any point in time. This is a safe place, and your opinions are respected. I also have the authority to disagree with you, and I will always state whether I disagree with you, but that should not cause you to change your vote. It should not, unless you feel like, wow, she made a great point too. Just want y'all to know you can disagree with me.
And I will add to that I do not believe that anybody in this meeting finds me intimidating. And if you do, please don't. I've always said as well, we have equal vote, equal time, equal people in this committee. And raise your hand if you find me intimidating. See? Oh, let's do it. That's all right. But yeah, I was told that I intimidated all of you into a particular decision in the past. So I can assure you, when we first started this committee, that every single person on the committee heard the exact same thing from us, that everybody is on an equal footing. And I found one of the youngest members of our committee going back had plenty to say. And I certainly was horrified to hear that there was a rumor going around that I was so intimidating that people couldn't, you know, say no and all that. So these all said no to me, and I've all said no to you before, and that's the way it's going to be moving forward. Thanks for bringing that up, Madison. I wanted to segue off that I don't think I'm intimidating. So anyway, now we got what, 2 minutes left, Stuart, except for you. I'm intimidating you. I'm so sorry.
Okay, you're the mayor. You're allowed.
Not in this committee. I'm not. I'm just a committee member.
I'm just a staff person in this committee. So whatever I say doesn't, I'm just here to help you get through what you need to. Okay. And with that, we've got 3 minutes left.
Yeah, I just wanted to say before last final call for public comment, Michael Barnes did mention that there's a person by the name of Charles Jenks. I don't know if that rings a bell to anybody. About 15 years ago, did an education lecture here in Brisbane. So I'm going to try to find that or find a connection, and I'll talk with Michael about that and see if that's something that I can pass around to everybody.
Who is Charles Jenks? What is he?
I guess he had done a land art education.
Back when we were doing, back years ago when we did the Baylands University type of stuff.
Yeah. So I'll take a look for that and pass around that link to everyone here as well. I thought that was a good suggestion. See if I can find it.
That name sounded familiar, but I had no clue what.
I also gave one, and so did a colleague of mine.
Oh, cool. Sounds great.
All right, are there any final public comments from anybody? Nothing on email or text? All right. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
We have a date for next meeting?
Oh,
no.
We'll send out a poll. Angel will send something out to everybody so we can schedule it.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.